welcome to the Memoir channel. My name is Nikki Smart, and today I'm going to be speaking with Meghan Riordan Jarvis about her book, End of the Hour, a therapist's memoir. So yes, Meghan is a therapist. She's a psychotherapist, an educator, and she specializes in grief and loss and trauma. She has her own podcast called Grief is My Side Hustle. She's a sought-after keynote speaker. She has done TED Talks. And this memoir is about her own personal experience with trauma. I really enjoyed reading her memoir because it was like a freaking fantastic therapy session. I mean, she really digs in deep, and because she understands what she's dealing with, she kind of gets all these aha moments. So anyway, let's go talk to Meghan and find out some more. Hi, Meghan. Welcome to the Memoir channel.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really honored to be here.
No, you know what? I just Googled you, and you're all over Google. Like page upon page upon page upon page came up. I'm like, you have done so much.
Oh,
It's very impressive.
thank you. I don't know how the algorithm works, but you know what? I think
Yeah.
when you have a podcast and you put out podcasts, it does make a little bit of an imprint. And I've been lucky enough to have incredible people that I've gotten to also like you interview and talk to.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I'll talk about grief and loss all day long. I mean,
Right.
it sounds crazy, but I love it.
So actually, would you just give a very brief sort of overview of what your memoir is about?
Yeah, so the end of the hour is my experience as a daughter, losing my mom, first my dad to cancer, and then my mom 2 years later, and my own personal experience with PTSD.
Hmm.
And what sort of adds maybe a little twist to the story is that I'm a trauma therapist, and I have been working almost exclusively with people who are struggling with grief and loss for 20 years. So as the book opens, I'm checking myself into the same inpatient facility that I have sent my clients who are really, really struggling, for the past 20 years.
Right. I mean, do you know that talk that Jill Bolt Taylor gave about her stroke? And she's a brain scientist. So
Yes.
I felt like your book was similar in that you're going through this experience, but because it's actually what you understand, and it was
Yes.
quite fascinating.
Thank you. I mean, this is the first real writing I have done in a long time.
Hmm.
And what was interesting for me is that most of the writing really was my own processing. It was just me writing the stories of what had happened so that I could kind of process them through my system.
Hmm.
And as they became a book, as that was presented to me, my publisher Zibby Owens called me. I knew her under different circumstances before I had a book with her, and she said, "Hey, do you want to write a memoir?" And I thought, wow, it's different to go from processing and writing about your own experience so that you understand yourself better to go to tell a story that maybe the purpose, the sacredness of the story then becomes about kind of helping other people with their own struggles. So
Hmm.
I wrote the whole book, and then my editor, Kathleen Harris, who's the editor at Zibby Books, she said, "We love it. It's great. One thing, can we get just like a little bit more of you as a clinician in the book?" And
Ah.
two things about it. One was I immediately understood what she was asking.
Hmm.
I immediately got like, oh, I get it. You want to know more about what I know about
Yeah.
what's happening to me. And when she asked, I realized I could do that, and I wasn't in the symptoms and the PTSD quite as I had access to, even though I wasn't then working as a therapist, I had access to telling that part of the story from a therapist perspective. And
Right.
I loved putting that layer. It was just like a layer. I just went back and
Hmm.
gave a little what we call like metacognition, like
Yeah,
this.
but I loved it. I loved it because that's what reminded me of it's like I'm having a stroke, but I understand exactly what's happening to me,
Yes.
which makes it
Yes.
fascinating.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So I have so many questions, but I feel like you had all these aha moments
Yeah.
where you suddenly recognized yourself, things that you had dealt with other people, and suddenly you're seeing it. I
Yes.
mean, was there one particular aha moment that struck you the most?
Yeah, you know what? There was, and actually, it's just outside of the book. The book sort of ends right as COVID begins.
Mhm.
The book ends as I'm headed back to kind of clean out my mom's house
That's
so that
right. Yes.
we can sell it. And in that moment, what you don't see in the book, but it's sort of peppered through the story, is about the energy that happens inside the body that is grief, right? Like
Mhm.
grief is the energy that's created inside your system. And I was such a mystery to myself. The way that I felt inside my body was so foreign that when people kind of looked at me like, oh, I know you, I felt like you don't know anything. What I look like is not who I am inside.
Yeah.
And I had been reading the book Between Two Kingdoms by
Mhm.
Layla Salud. She has this terrible experience where she gets a rare form of cancer and basically lives in a hospital for, I think, 4 years. And, most of the time it's like she is going to die of this cancer. And then all of a sudden she's not going to die. And the doctors say to her, like, okay, well, just, go out into the world. Like, good luck, have a life. And she says, where do I go? What do I've spent the last, I think it's 6 years being sick. Like,
Oh,
I don't have a life to go to. And that's how I felt when I was like packing up. I describe it in the book as sort of like dismantling a set from a
mhm.
play.
Mhm.
I was packing up my parents' things and I was like, where in my life can I find myself?
Yeah.
And I couldn't find myself. And what ended up happening was we took a trip across the country during COVID. And what people said, I have 3 kids, they're teenagers now, they were younger then, but what people said was like, oh my gosh, you're such a good parent. What an extraordinary learning opportunity for your kids. And every time I would say, I can't sit still in my grief. I
Yeah.
can't sit still. And as a trauma therapist and somebody who works with a lot of people in recovery, when people are itchy and they want to move and they want to like get divorced and they want to cut their hair and we've kind of been trained to slow them down and be like, look, no sudden movements, right? Like
Mhm.
get your
Mhm.
sobriety online the thing about grief is there is this jetpack of energy that is created inside your system on account of the loss. And it's not about anything other than the loss. If you were able to restore, if my mother came back from the dead, all that energy would have gone away.
Right.
I wasn't like on a spiritual journey to find myself. I was lost because my mom was like a North Star.
Mhm.
And I have had so many clients say that to me. I've had
Yeah.
so many clients be like, I need to move back to Arizona. I'm going to get divorced. I'm quitting this job. And I really felt like my job is to help them slow this down. And once I was in this space, I wanted to call every one of those people and say, I am so sorry that I did not support you right. Because I knew, and it's not, my mom dying was not the first death that I had ever experienced.
Mhm.
It's the first time I got lost on the earth. It was
Right.
the first time that like it was dark as night and I had no instruments and I wasn't sure I was gonna like survive. And
Yeah.
I have had clients sort of say, like, and that's when you run. You just run and you
Mhm.
run and then you'll find yourself somewhere. And as a
Mhm.
therapist, I was like, no, that's not a good idea. And then when I felt what it felt like myself, I was like, it doesn't matter how you feel about it. It is the way it is. You got to
Right.
run.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then I was also quite fascinated because you tried all these different sort of modalities when you were in this facility, and the
Yeah.
horse one sounded amazing.
I will tell you, I was like, equine therapy is totally made up and a load of nonsense. So part of the
Mhm.
reason I wrote about that again, I that was not my first experience with horses. I grew up riding horses. I love horses, and it was the first thing I was assigned to was like walk up the hill and go to equine therapy. And I just thought, all right, we'll start with the nonsense and then we'll get serious with the other
Mhm.
things that work. And one of the things that's really humbling about really being in a desperate way is that you are very available
Right.
for intervention and change. So, I mean, I can still like make my body have chills now. I knew what was happening, right? Like they were having me sort of brush the horse in this way that's bilateral stimulation with my left and my right. Probably if I had been washing a car, I would have had the same sensation.
Hmm.
But there's something about the horse regulating to your breath. And also, the horses in this at this place had also been abused. So they were their own kind of hypervigilant. Um, but I just, you know, pretty much despite myself, despite my crotchety ways, and that is true of me. I'm often like, this is not going to work, or I'm not going to like this person, or this is
No,
going
but
to be not.
I loved that you had that voice in your head the whole time going poo-pooing everything and then going, oh my God, it's fantastic.
It's actually something that I really like about me is that I don't talk myself out of my reaction to things.
Mhm.
I'm like, this is complete and solid baloney. But I still am like, yeah, but I'll try it and we'll see what happens. And there are a number of things, equine therapy being one of them, where I'm like, oh, well, I was wholly wrong about that. And I
Yeah.
am appreciative of being updated, and the people on my team and the people that I keep close know that I can have very strong reactions that are like, we're absolutely not doing this. And they'll look at each other like, we're probably going to do it. We just let her have her thing and then we'll get there.
Ah, I mean, there's another, it was such a small little part, but it brought tears to my eyes was when you asked the guy to to text you in an hour's time to remind you to pick up your pies. And he said, hello, it's your pies. Please don't forget us. And I mean, it's just so sweet.
There are some things in life. I've had a number of moments where I just think, like, I'm not sure that person was just that person. Like, he was really young. So there's this scene for people who are listening where I am trying to figure out how to live life, and the people at the treatment center sort of send me into this small town to see how I do. And because I'd had a panic attack earlier, and I just was like, I'm not sure I can go home. And they really wanted me to know I could go home.
Mhm.
So I went to this coffee shop and I did all those things. It reminded me of being a teenager where you're like really self-conscious or super anxious because you're not sure you're standing in the right line and you can't see the case. And so you don't know what you're going to order. And anyway, I ended up ordering all these pies. And this teenager who was working there was just unreasonably kind to me. And so,
Mhm.
like, maybe he went home and said to his family, like, there was a woman and she didn't seem well and I helped her. Or maybe he thought nothing about it because that's the way he is all the time.
Yeah,
But I really received his like willingness to not look at me like, what is wrong with you that you are tearing up that you are in the wrong line? And what's wrong with you
right.
that what do you mean
Yeah,
you don't remember if you'd eaten pie? Um, and I felt really proud of myself for saying, like, I'm probably going to forget these pies because my mind is not right, and asking him for help because that
yeah,
was a big part of being in therapy. A big part of being in therapy was like, ask for the help. If you don't
right,
use it, fine, but
right.
have it nearby.
I mean, I kind of feel that that was sort of the theme of the whole book, really, was this getting to ask for help and getting to accept help. And I mean, there was one thing you said. What was it about? You're not a failure because you need help. You're a human. Ah, I mean, yeah. So it's, and I understand where you were coming from because you were so used to relying on yourself.
What's
Yeah.
interesting about writing a memoir is like some of what you're doing is like thinking about it from your perspective and then just sort of wondering if other people share that narrative.
Hmm.
So I didn't ask people who read the book early, but I imagine there are probably people who read my book and are like, "What are you talking about? I gave Megan help all the time.
All right.
Megan asked me to, take out the garbage." There's an existential kind of like relying on something outside of yourself.
Hmm.
And in the book, I would say it's people, in my life now, 5 years past the experience of losing my parents. I think it's more than just people. I think it's also, maybe the history of humanity and God and spirit and whatever. But I was not plugged into any of those things. I just sort of
Hmm.
felt like one person really struggling on the earth who didn't trust or know that I mattered enough to people that they could help me. And I wasn't sure those people had the skill sets to
Right.
help. So it was just easier. It was
Yeah.
easier.
No, I really identified with it. It really resonated with me, like the trust fall and all that. I mean, there's no way I could do one of those. I'm very proud
I
of
still can't believe I
you.
did that trust fall. I mean, I avoided, I'm a therapist, 20 years. I avoided doing a trust fall for like 20 years. I still
Yeah.
can't believe it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, well done. Is there maybe a part you would like to read for us from your book?
would love to.
All right, great. I'm
Yeah.
going to put you on speaker view. So here we go, so that it's all you.
Okay. I'll read a couple. So the scene is the scene um where I'm about to discover that my mom died. My mom died suddenly in her sleep unexpectedly. I drove an hour and 17 minutes through careful desperation to be with my mother's body after she died. I'd left the house with the kids that next morning to go to Boston to pick up my best friend Maya's son and bring him back to the beach with us for a few days. It rained lightly the whole way, and like marauding pirates after rumored treasure, my kids tumbled out of our minivan practically before it came to a stop. They scrabbled up the wooden stairs to grab their cousin while I sat alone in the driver's seat. I watched misty droplets collect on the windshield as my mind wandered. Suddenly, I felt an acute internal contraction from my pelvis, like a phantom water breaking. The sensation seized me from deep inside and felt so real. I looked down at my legs, expecting to see wetness. Like cold air on a sub zero New England day, my mind froze with one crystallized thought: she's dead. My body told me, and I knew it was true. I scrambled to call my mother's house and was not surprised when the phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I couldn't unknow what I knew. I texted my husband, who was working back at the house. Have you seen my mom today? I started the engine like a getaway driver and yelled at the kids to hurry as they stepped on each other's feet, climbing back inside the minivan. Mike texted back, maybe a friend picked her up this morning for mass. The idea was so ludicrously out of step with the frail woman we'd visited with for only minutes the day before. I started driving. Mike texted again. Her bedroom door is still closed. Do you want me to go in? In only a matter of moments, we'd found ourselves at the threshold that every griever knows: the precipice of before and after. Survivors of untenable loss relive one moment of their lives 1,000 times over and over, and this one would become mine. My efforts to stay planted in my before were no match for the inevitability of time. I felt panic rise as I texted my reply: I need you to go in, please. I'm sorry. I understood the cost of my ask. 100,000 lifetimes of seconds went by, but also less than 5 minutes. I called Mike and it went to voicemail. I knew he was on the phone with the paramedics. The car clock said the time was 10:28. I marked the moment the world was lost to me. Fumbling to drive and text, I somehow also took a screenshot of my phone. Months later, I would find the odd photographic documentation of my devastation. Mom. Lucy's voice was tentative and questioning from the passenger seat. We both kept our eyes trained on the road in front of us. Out of the corner of my mind, I could see her face flush with fear. I exhaled in an effort to keep my composure. I think we're about to get some really bad news, honey, I said. Oof, this part kills me.
Mm.
I will remember the grace of my 11-year-old daughter's reply for the rest of my life. She did not ask me to explain, but instead offered simply, do you want me to help you? My 45-year-old, 9-year-old self said, yes, please. Lucy reached over and put her hand on the steering wheel, firmly covering mine. We're going to box breathe. Can you do that? Do you want me to count for you? Her voice was soft but controlled. I'd taught her the meditative practice of box breathing after she saw a scary movie at a friend's house and had a few troubled nights' sleep. The breath calms the body while the instructions distract the mind. I nodded and Lucy drew a horizontal line in the air. Deep breath in for 4, vertical line down, hold for 4, horizontal line across, exhale for 4, vertical line up, pause for 4. Her voice was rhythmic. Deep breath in for 4. 7 minutes of breathing, a gift from a mother, from a daughter to a mother. I'll just stop there.
Mm. Yeah, that is beautiful. Um, but I mean, what struck me there was that you had already done this for your daughter and that she understood what it was. I mean, it is very beautiful. But I mean, I think that you are a good parent because I think that's a lovely thing that kids, you're giving them coping skills that
Yeah.
most parents don't even know about. So, and
I'm pretty convinced that I'm a good parent and a bad parent. I'm
uh,
good and imperfect. I think that's the truth. I also think, I really think this. These are the kinds of things that I miss my mom for. But my mom used to say things to me when I was a kid. She would say things like, "I admire you," and I would think like, "What is she talking about?" Like, no, she doesn't. But I look at my daughter who's 16 now, and I do admire her. And I think some of the things that I have taught her, I taught her so she could make different choices, so
mhm,
that she knew the way that I did it and I thought was right. And then she bounced off of that and figured out her own way. So, yeah, I taught Lucy box breathing, but she definitely taught it back to me in that moment. And
mhm.
I think it's a really powerful metaphor for what parenting is like
It's lovely.
you're doing the best you can with them in that moment and you're giving them everything you have, and then they give you stuff back that didn't come exactly from you. And
Yeah,
it's really
yeah,
humbling.
it is. It's lovely. Now, how long after your mother's death did you have this sort of now you're not coping at all anymore? How long after was that?
Oh, I mean, my mom died on a Tuesday, and her funeral was not until the following Friday. So it was
Hmm.
like more than 10 days later, because it took a long time to organize my five brothers and sisters. Um, and the day of her funeral, I started to feel my mind
Mm,
fracture. I write about it. I start to remember my dad telling me the story of sailors who got lost at sea. And I just started to feel like floaty and not inside my body.
mhm,
And by the day after my mom's funeral, I started to, and it's in the book, I just start to have the most profound, unrelenting panic attacks.
mhm.
So it was pretty fast. It was pretty
That is
like
pretty fast.
it was almost like when there was nothing left to do. I mean, I think I would tell you, and again, it's not spoiling anything. The very first thing I thought, I sort of felt that my mom had died. But the very first thing I thought when my husband told me that she died, it was like this crystallized, like, it's your fault she died. And even though I knew it wasn't true, I really believed it in that moment. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna ruminate on this. Like, it was almost like, I don't know, seeing a dark figure down an alley where you're like, that is a mugger. Like that,
Mhm.
could it be something else? Maybe, but it isn't. I knew really quickly that that thought was gonna get me, that I
Yeah.
was not gonna be bigger than it, and that it was an indication of sickness almost like right away.
Mhm. I mean, and I know that you did all these different modalities, like you did the EMDR,
EMDR. Yep.
and then you kind of relived that particular scene. But now,
Yes.
what exactly is EMDR?
It's such a good question. So, and the reason I write about these things in the book, like I write about my dad's death, where I didn't need a ton of help after my dad died. My dad's death was sad and hard the way lots of death is, but it didn't make me sick. It didn't dysregulate me. He wasn't a North Star, and I didn't find myself on my knees.
Mhm,
With my mom, I was like dysregulated from my central nervous system, the connection between my body and my brain, pretty much instantly. And so I really wanted to show people that when that happens, it's it's trauma related in the way that we use trauma as a clinical word, like this is a problem,
mhm,
and that you need treatment. And I don't mean treatment like we see therapy on TV where it's like, "Oh, Megan, tell me your problems." In trauma, we often don't talk about our problems because the talking just makes you feel more of the symptoms. So EMDR is this extraordinary intervention, therapeutic intervention that was, as many things are, was invented by someone who used it themselves and discovered how powerful it is. So the idea is that you bring up in your five senses. So you let your body start to kind of relive, which is something we're often resisting, how terrifying and awful it was in that moment to realize that your person had died. So for some people, it's like when they were in the car of the accident or when they were down the dark alley, but you use descriptive language and you get your body back there. And then you look either at a mechanism that has dots of light or something that looks like a pen and it has a little flashlight at the end. And while you're thinking about that terrible thing, the therapist just moves the pen and you follow it with your eyes. And it looks like some kind of shamanistic mumbo jumbo, but the way that it works from a neuroscience perspective is it impacts how you're storing the memory in your brain. So rather than it being like a packed, tissue paper that's jammed into your brain and it causes you all this distress and pain, it's like we spread it out, and then kind of tore it up into tiny little pieces and spread it across the brain. And you're using the optic nerve to do that. You doesn't have to be a light bar. And so they call it bilateral stimulation, which is the same thing that I was doing with the horses.
Right.
Which is why movement and exercise is really important in trauma, because you don't want the energy to like land in a place and become jammed in there where it kind of rots a little bit. You want that energy to move through your system so that your system can continue to update and sort of continue to learn what it's like to live without your person. And EMDR for some people can be impactful in one session.
It's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Oh.
So often and I write about it a lot in this book so that people know about it. In my clinical book that's coming out, I write about it there also because I just want people to know there are treatments. And if you get sick the way that I got sick, don't wait a year. Don't listen to your Aunt Janice who says like, oh, well, I also cried a lot, but it's fine. If you have symptoms that are really, really dysregulating you, then go see someone and let them use the tools that we have
Yeah.
that are so helpful.
Well, okay, so you mentioned this other book, so let's talk a little bit about that. Now, this is a more recent one, right? This one just came out this year.
Yes, so it hasn't come out yet. It comes out in
Oh, it
October.
hasn't even come out yet.
It
Okay.
hasn't come out yet. So it's with Sounds True, and I call it a clinical book, even though I'm not supposed to, but it is a very approachable book. It's called Can Anyone Tell Me Essential Questions About Grief and Loss? And really the way that it was built, as I was writing the memoir, I had this little soapbox of like, why don't we tell people the truth about grief and loss? And I have lots of ideas and feelings about why we don't tell people the truth. But what you come up against really quickly is people are like, well, it's too personal. It's like impossible to teach. But there's a lot of stuff that's really personal. Like our nutrition is really personal. Our sex life is really personal.
Right.
Like how we want to parent is really personal. And we have millions of books on those things. I think we are so avoidant about the idea that there are truisms in grief and loss that we could support people, that we just are like, look, if you're going through something hard, that's on you. Just call me when you need me. And in reality, my book is based on, I read 188 books on grief and loss, memoir, novels, but a lot of clinical books. And there were kind of like 12, 14 things that I thought, I want to tell grievers what is going on. Because if you think about your body, human bodies are kind of generalizable. So what happens in grief is energy is created in the body. And we actually can sort of say like, well, this is what generally happens. Or some people react to it this way. Some people react to it the opposite way. So the book is that. The book is a whole bunch of chapters, and the chapters are, can anyone tell me why my memory's all screwed up? Can anyone tell me why I don't like any of my friends and family anymore? Can anyone tell me why I think that butterfly is my mom? And it really is a love letter and a nod to all my clients who had those conversations with me and really talked to me about the truth of their experience over and over and over again.
No, well done you, because I think, yeah, it's brilliant. And it should be out there and everyone should have this information and we should talk about it.
Yes. I mean, we
Yeah.
should. When I pause to think about it, it really makes me mad. And when I meet people who are deeply sick and they are blaming themselves, well, I probably should have done things differently. And, I'm just too sensitive and nobody else, is still crying, since
Right.
my dad died. And it is really normalizing to say to people, like, what do you mean? Crying for 3 years about your dad? That's normal.
Yeah.
He was in life for 50 years, or he was like, why wouldn't you still feel the
Right.
experience?
Right. I mean, I'm just thinking now because I had this really bad breakup once, and it absolutely knocked me so bad that I actually
Absolutely.
I kind of wish that he had died, so people would understand because I could not just snap out of it, and it did.
Absolutely.
I got to a point where I felt embarrassed to even tell people that I was still upset about him.
But
But
I totally understand. I mean, a really hard breakup is what brought me into therapy to begin with, because I had all of those feelings. I felt like there is something wrong with me.
yeah.
And I did what all of my clients do, which is like I learned to kind of stop talking about it, because I could see people were kind of, their eyes were glazing over. They were sick of listening to me, but like I was not sick of talking about it. I was still trying to figure out what happened here and why didn't it work out, and how do I prevent something bad like this happening again? And I really do think being able to say to people, look, not everybody's going to react to a breakup that way, but for those of you that do, here are the things. One, it's grief, of course.
Yeah.
Any loss that we
Right.
experience, we are going to grieve, or we should grieve.
Yeah.
But many people, many grievers will sort of say to me, like, I don't know if this counts. Right. And then tell me that their
Yeah,
dog died.
but I think
They,
what it is, like you say in your book, it's not just this grief, it sort of suddenly triggers all the past stuff comes woof and comes into this moment, and then you
that's
have
right.
to deal with it.
That's right. That's
So,
right. Because that's
yeah,
how the brain works. The brain works in this
yeah,
incredible way where it's sort of like collecting, it's making little collections of experiences. And it will put, almost like in a file folder, it will put all your losses that you had. And so a breakup will get put alongside not getting a promotion, or, having a
yeah,
miscarriage. And like, it doesn't mean they're all the same in intensity or significance, but they are all losses and they all
mhm,
include grief. And it also kind of explains why sometimes you're telling someone, like, oh, my husband died. And they're like, oh, I know what you mean. My dog died when I was a kid. And you're like, what are you talking about? But
yeah,
their brain has sort of pulled up their experience with loss
yeah,
in order to connect to the story. And it's like, well, they're
yeah,
not the same, but I get how this happened. I get
yeah,
how you're trying to connect. And what would be more useful is if you were able to say, huh, I've spent some time being educated in grief and loss. And did you know there are 15 online resources for widows on this website that you might find useful? That's way
mhm,
better
yeah.
from a grief education perspective than saying, like, yeah, my dog died, and that is how I can relate to you.
All right, so when is your book coming out? Because people are going to need
October
it.
29th. Yeah, so this one comes out October 29th. If people want to come follow me on Instagram, there's going to be a
Okay.
whole bunch of stuff. The thing that I'm the most excited about, with End of the Hour, I did a traditional book tour, and I did a whole bunch of bookstores, and I'm doing a few of those things with this book, but mostly what I'm doing is salon style insight panels where people pick one chapter of the book or a couple chapters of the book that they're the most interested in, get 30 people together, and I will come there and
Ah,
we will have a class. I know.
I
It's
love it.
really, really cool. Yeah, so I already have like 10 of them scheduled. I have a bunch that are in LA and a bunch that are in Boston and a few kind of in between.
And
And I have some
and
great
and you can do it over Zoom because
You can do it over Zoom. The
okay.
only commitment to doing it is just you need to have 30 people who are willing to buy the book. That's it. So and there are ways, if we're doing it in person, there are ways to get that book at a discount. Amazon always has the books at a discount.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it doesn't take much. So it's like having a little Zoom or live book club, and you get to pick the chapter that you're the most
No,
interested.
that's lovely.
Yeah,
I
so
love
I'm
that.
really excited about that. That's going to be a ton of fun. And I've created a course it's called the Grief Mentor Method. And we train clinicians, we bring it into companies, and we have an online platform that's meant for grievers that's
Mhm.
all launching in December. So if
Great.
people are interested, it's called the Grief Mentor Method, and it's 6 core components to creating a personalized grief practice. So it really is the thing that we want, which is just what are the things that I'm meant to do to help myself kind of get through the next 24 hours when I'm grieving. And we can't tell you what to do, but we will give you support on what to try. It's
Some
really
guidance. Yeah.
yeah. So if people come follow me on Instagram, that's the easiest way.
Absolutely. I'll put it underneath here. I'll put your website and
Great.
give them
Yeah.
that information. And I feel like you need to document, if you go and do these group, you need to
Yeah.
document that to see, like, I mean, it'll be really fascinating in like 2 or 3 years' time to see what impact that's having or how that's
We are
helping.
so lucky to be partnered with 2 different statisticians, people who are, we have for the
Yeah,
clinical program, we have a workbook that when you complete the workbook, it actually collects the data
brilliant.
about the experience. So that we had some really good partners sort of sit with us and say, one of the things you're going to need is the feedback about what works and what doesn't work. So we're doing that from the start, and it means we have this super cool online workbook that people get to answer their questions, and then those answers become data for us, and then we know how to sort of coach and
Ah,
guide people. I know it's
fantastic.
really
Fantastic. Well,
fun.
I wish you the very best of luck.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been such an honor to
I
be.
know it's an honor for me. So thank you
I'm
very much
really
for coming
grateful.
on. And
Thank you.
yeah, I'll put all the information underneath here, and then you can say when this book will be out and all of that. So
Thank you so much.
thank
Thank
you
you.
too. All right, bye bye.